I watched my husband's hand linger on the bride's waist a moment too long, and something inside me cracked. But the sharpest pain was the smile my daughter-in-law gave me as if to say, "You deserved it." That moment shattered years of silence and pretending. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought I knew what family meant. I was wrong about so many things, and tonight, as I sit in my small apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, watching the city lights blur through tears I've held back for decades, I realize that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we've loved the longest. Every morning, I wake up in this tiny space that costs more than my social security check should allow. The walls are thin enough that I can hear Mrs. Chen next door making her morning tea, the gentle clink of porcelain against porcelain reminding me of a time when I had a full tea set, when I had a dining room to use it in, when I had people who wanted to sit at my table. I drag myself through each day now like I'm swimming through thick honey. The routine never changes. I water the spider plants hanging by the window, the ones I bought 3 years ago when I first moved here, thinking they might make this place feel like home. They're still alive, somehow, despite my neglect during those endless months when I was too busy taking care of everyone else to remember they needed water. The coffee maker gurgles to life, brewing that bitter liquid that tastes like regret and lost dreams. I stand at my kitchen counter, no bigger than a cutting board, and stare out at the jagged skyline of Manhattan. Those glass towers reach toward heaven like prayers, but from where I stand, they look more like tombstones marking all the dreams that died in this city. The hospital bills pile up on my small dining table, white envelopes with red lettering that might as well be death certificates. Each one represents another piece of my independence chipped away, another month I'll have to choose between my heart medication and groceries, another reminder that at my age, in this country, being sick is a luxury I can't afford. The rejected invitations haunt me more than the bills, though. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to. Holiday dinners where my absence wasn't even noticed. Family gatherings planned in group chats I was mysteriously removed from. Each snub cuts deeper than any scalpel ever could. But it was that wedding night, the one I tried so hard to pretend I didn't see, that finally broke something inside me that had been bending for 47 years of marriage. I remember getting ready that evening, standing in front of my bathroom mirror that's too small to show my whole face at once. I had chosen my faded blue dress, the same one I wore to my son David's college graduation 15 years ago. Back then, it fit differently. Back then, I had hoped that things would get better, that the sacrifices would mean something, that love would be returned in kind. The smell of jasmine from the bridal bouquet sitting on the gift table beside me that night transported me back to my own wedding day in 1975. I was 25 then, standing in St. Patrick's Cathedral in a dove-white gown that cost more than my father made in 2 months. Robert looked so handsome in his rented tuxedo, his hair thick and dark, his smile genuine. We promised to love and cherish each other through good times and bad, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. I kept my promises. Every single one of them. That wedding night, watching my husband of 47 years hold another woman close on the dance floor, I realized he had forgotten his. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got there, how a woman who once believed in forever love ended up alone in a studio apartment, questioning whether she ever mattered to anyone at all. The sacrifices started small, the way they always do. In our early marriage, when Robert was building his law practice from nothing, I worked double shifts as a nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital to keep us afloat. My feet would throb every night, swollen and aching from 12 hours on linoleum floors, but I never complained. I would come home and cook dinner, iron his shirts, balance our checkbook by lamplight while he slept. "We're building something together, Maggie," he would say, using the nickname no one else was allowed to use. "These sacrifices will pay off. You'll see." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. When David was born, I took early retirement to raise him properly. We couldn't afford daycare, and Robert's practice needed every dollar we could spare. I gave up my career, my pension, my independence, because that's what mothers did. That's what wives did. That's what love looked like, or so I thought. The years blurred together in a haze of scraped knees and bedtime stories, soccer practices and piano lessons we couldn't afford but provided anyway. I stretched every dollar until it screamed, shopping at thrift stores and clipping coupons, making one chicken last a week, darning socks until there was more thread than original fabric. Robert's practice grew slowly, but it did grow. By the time David graduated high school, we were comfortable. Not wealthy, but comfortable enough that I didn't have to choose between heating the apartment and buying milk. I thought the hard times were behind us. That's when David met Sarah. I should have seen the signs from the beginning. The way she looked at our modest home with barely concealed disdain. The way she talked about her father's investment portfolio and her mother's shopping trips to Europe. The way she smiled when David told her I had been just a nurse before I became just a housewife. But I was so hungry for family, so desperate to have more people to love, that I ignored every red flag and welcomed her with open arms. Mom, can you help us with the down payment on the apartment? David asked 3 months before their wedding. They were sitting on my living room sofa, Sarah's manicured fingers drumming impatiently on her Hermes purse while my son looked at me with the same pleading eyes he'd had as a child. Of course, sweetheart, I said, even though it meant emptying the savings account I'd been building for 20 years. Family helps family. Sarah's smile was sharp as broken glass. You're the best, Margaret. David is so lucky to have such a generous mother. The words sounded right, but something in her voice made my skin crawl. I couldn't put my finger on it then. Now I know it was the sound of someone calculating how much they could take from me. The requests started small after that. A loan for furniture that was never repaid. Help with Sarah's student loans because she shouldn't have to start marriage in debt. Money for a vacation to celebrate David's promotion, money for car repairs, money for Sarah's sister's baby shower gift. It's temporary, Mom, David would always say. We'll pay you back as soon as things settle down. But things never settled down. The requests just got bigger. When my first grandchild was born, little Emma with David's eyes and my stubborn chin, I thought everything would change. Surely becoming a grandmother would bring us closer together. Surely this precious child would be the bridge that connected our hearts. Instead, Emma became another reason I was needed but not wanted. Mom, can you watch Emma tonight? Sarah has book club and I have to work late. Mom, Emma's daycare is closed. Can you take her for the week? Mom, Sarah's not feeling well. Can you handle the night feeding? I said yes to everything. How do you say no to spending time with your granddaughter? How do you explain to a crying baby that grandma might be being used? You don't. You pick up that sweet child and you sing her to sleep, and you pretend your heart isn't breaking a little more each time her parents drop her off without so much as asking how you're feeling. The migraines started around Emma's first birthday. Stress-related, the doctor said. My blood pressure was climbing too, and I was having trouble sleeping. The apartment that had once felt cozy now felt like a prison, the walls closing in every time my phone rang with another request for help. Mom, we're thinking about buying a house in Westchester, David announced one Sunday dinner. The schools are better for Emma, and Sarah found this amazing place with a pool. That sounds wonderful, I said, cutting Emma's food into tiny pieces while Sarah scrolled through her phone and David outlined their financial needs. The thing is, we need help with the down payment. It's a significant amount, but it's an investment in Emma's future. In our family's future. I looked at Robert, hoping for support, for someone to say that maybe we'd given enough, done enough. He was reading the sports section of the Times, completely oblivious to the conversation that was about to drain our retirement savings. How much? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be more than we had. 80,000. The number hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. $80,000 that I didn't have, that would require me to cash in my small retirement account, to mortgage what little security I had left. That's a lot of money, David. Sarah finally looked up from her phone, her eyes cold as January rain. We weren't asking for charity, Margaret. We'll pay it back with interest. It's practically a guaranteed return on your investment. But there was no contract. No written agreement. Just a handshake and a promise from my son that I wanted so desperately to trust. I gave them the money. All of it. Every cent I had saved from my nursing salary, every dollar Robert and I had squirreled away for our old age. I told myself it was an investment in Emma's future, in David's happiness, in keeping our family together. I told myself a lot of lies in those days. The house in Westchester was beautiful, I'll give them that. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen bigger than my entire apartment, and that pool Sarah had dreamed of. Emma had her own playroom filled with toys I couldn't afford to buy her, a backyard where she could run and laugh and grow. I was happy for them. Truly. But I was also dying inside, because the distance between Manhattan and Westchester felt like an ocean, and I was drowning in it. The visits became less frequent. Sunday dinners turned into monthly events, then quarterly ones, then special occasions only. My phone calls went unreturned for days. My invitations to visit were met with excuses about busy schedules and conflicting commitments. We're so overwhelmed with the mortgage payments, Sarah would say when I finally reached her. David's working 60-hour weeks, and I'm juggling Emma and my yoga instructor certification. We barely have time to breathe, let alone visit. But their social media told a different story. Pictures of dinner parties with Sarah's friends. Weekend trips to the Hamptons. Shopping sprees in Soho. Date nights at expensive restaurants while Emma stayed with Sarah's mother, who lived 20 minutes away and apparently didn't charge babysitting fees. The first Christmas in their new house, I wasn't invited. Oh, Margaret, Sarah said when I called to ask about dinner plans, didn't David tell you? We're doing a small, intimate celebration this year. Just immediate family. Immediate family. After 46 years of marriage and 25 years of motherhood, I was no longer considered immediate family. I spent Christmas Day alone in my apartment, watching It's a Wonderful Life on television and eating Chinese takeout from containers that seemed to judge my solitude. The fortune cookies message mocked me: good things come to those who wait. I had been waiting for good things my entire life. The pattern continued for 3 years. I became the emergency contact when they needed something, invisible when they didn't. When Robert had his first heart attack, they visited him in the hospital exactly once. When I fell and broke my wrist, Sarah sent a get well card she probably bought at CVS. But when they needed money for Sarah's brother's wedding gift, when David's car broke down, when Emma needed summer camp fees, suddenly I was family again. Suddenly my phone rang with voices full of love and concern and carefully calculated need. The worst part wasn't the money they took. It wasn't even the loneliness that ate away at my soul like acid. The worst part was watching my husband, the man I had loved for nearly 5 decades, pretend none of it was happening. Robert had always been conflict-averse. In our early marriage, I found it charming. He was the peacekeeper, the negotiator, the one who smoothed over family disputes with gentle words and diplomatic smiles. But as the years passed, his conflict avoidance became cowardice, and his diplomacy became complicity. "They're young, Maggie," he would say when I tried to talk about feeling used. "They'll learn to appreciate what you've done for them. Give them time." Time. As if I had an endless supply of it. As if my 70s were a practice round for real life instead of the final act of a play I was no longer enjoying. When David and Sarah announced they were renewing their vows for their 10th anniversary, I was surprised to receive an invitation. Maybe things were changing. Maybe they had learned to appreciate what I had sacrificed for them. Maybe this was the new beginning I had prayed for. I spent weeks planning what to wear, how to do my hair, what gift to bring. I wanted to look my best, to show them I was still vital, still valuable, still worth including in their lives. I chose a navy blue dress from Macy's that made my eyes look bluer and my figure look younger. I had my hair styled at the salon for the first time in 2 years, splurging on highlights that caught the light and made me feel almost pretty again. The renewal ceremony was held at the same country club where they'd had their original wedding, an elegant venue in Greenwich that cost more per person than I spent on groceries in 3 months. I arrived early, hoping to help with last-minute preparations, hoping to feel useful and needed on such an important day. Sarah barely acknowledged my presence. She was too busy directing the photographer and adjusting her new dress, a flowing white gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. David was nowhere to be seen, probably getting ready with his groomsmen in whatever room rich people use to prepare for parties that celebrate their own wealth. I found myself standing alone by the gift table, straightening the ribbon on the crystal vase I had bought them, when I overheard Sarah talking to her maid of honor. "I can't believe we have to invite Robert's mother," she was saying, her voice low but not low enough. "She's such a downer. Always looking like someone died. And that dress, did she shop at a thrift store? At least she gives good gifts," the maid of honor replied with a laugh that cut through me like a serrated knife. "Well, there is that. David's inheritance situation is complicated. His parents don't have much, but what they do have will eventually come to us. It's a long-term investment in being nice to her. A long-term investment. That's what I was to my daughter-in-law. Not a mother-in-law, not a grandmother, not even a human being with feelings and dreams and a breaking heart. An investment that would eventually pay dividends when I died." I spent the entire ceremony in a haze of pain and disbelief. The words of love and commitment that David and Sarah exchanged sounded hollow to my ears, meaningless promises from people who saw relationships as transactions and love as currency. But it was during the reception that my world truly shattered. The band was playing Unforgettable when Robert asked the bride to dance. "It's traditional," I told myself. "It's what fathers-in-law do. There's nothing wrong with a simple dance between family members." But as I watched them move together on the dance floor, I saw something that knocked the breath from my lungs. Robert's hand wasn't just resting on Sarah's waist. It was caressing it, his fingers tracing small circles on the silk fabric of her dress. His face was closer to hers than social dancing required. His eyes were closed as if he was savoring the moment, as if he was holding something precious that he didn't want to let go. The dance went on too long. Much too long. Other couples joined them on the floor, but Robert and Sarah continued their intimate swaying as if the rest of the world didn't exist. I watched my husband of 47 years hold another woman with more tenderness than he had shown me in decades. That's when I felt eyes on me. I turned to see Sarah's maid of honor watching my face, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She leaned over to whisper something to the woman next to her, and they both looked at me and laughed. But it was Sarah herself who delivered the killing blow. When the dance finally ended and Robert escorted her back toward the head table, she caught my eye across the room. Her smile was triumphant, predatory, satisfied. She mouthed 3 words that will haunt me until my dying day: "You deserved it." I sat frozen in my chair, my untouched dinner growing cold in front of me, as the full weight of my situation crashed down on me like a demolished building. This wasn't just about money or visits or feeling forgotten. This was about my husband being emotionally seduced by a woman young enough to be his daughter, a woman who had been systematically isolating me from my own family while drawing him into her web of manipulation and deceit. The ride home in the taxi was silent except for the sound of my tears hitting my purse. Robert stared out the window, humming the song he had danced to with Sarah, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife's heart had just been ripped from her chest and thrown under the wheels of our cab. That night, I lay in bed listening to Robert's satisfied snores and realized that I had become a stranger in my own life. The woman who had sacrificed everything for love had been replaced by a ghost, invisible and ignored, haunting the edges of other people's happiness while my own withered away like flowers left too long without water. I thought about the money I had given them. Not just the $80,000 for the house, but all the smaller amounts over the years. The loans that were never repaid. The emergencies that always seemed to happen right before expensive purchases appeared on their social media accounts. The gifts for Emma that were really investments in my right to spend time with my own granddaughter. By my calculation, I had given David and Sarah over $130,000 in the past decade. Money that should have been sitting in my retirement account, earning interest, providing security for my old age. Money that should have guaranteed me dignity in my final years instead of forcing me to choose between rent and medication, between heating and eating. But the money wasn't even the worst of it. The worst part was the slow, systematic erasure of my importance in my own family. Every family photo where I was cropped out or positioned on the edge, as if I was an afterthought. Every birthday where my gift was opened last and acknowledged with the least enthusiasm. Every holiday where my contributions were forgotten but my absence was barely noticed. I had been disappearing for years, and I hadn't even realized it was happening. The morning after the vow renewal ceremony, I called my doctor and made an appointment I had been putting off for months. The chest pains I had been experiencing weren't heartbreak, as I had assumed. They were actual heart problems, stress-related but real enough to require medication I couldn't afford. "Mrs. Thompson, your blood pressure is dangerously high," Dr. Martinez told me, his kind face creased with concern. "Are you under unusual stress?" I laughed, a sound with no humor in it whatsoever. "You could say that. I'm going to prescribe medication, but it's expensive. Do you have good insurance coverage?" "Not really. I had lost my nursing pension benefits when the hospital merged with a larger corporation and reduced coverage for retirees. My Medicare covered the basics, but medications like this fell into the gap where coverage ended and poverty began. There are assistance programs," he said gently. "Social services that can help with prescription costs for seniors on fixed incomes." Social services. Assistance programs. The language of last resorts, of admitting that the American dream had failed me, that a lifetime of work and sacrifice had led me to a place where I needed charity to afford the medicine that would keep me alive. I walked home from the doctor's office in a daze, my prescription clutched in my hand like a ticket to a movie I couldn't afford to see. The streets of Manhattan blurred around me as I tried to process the fact that at 72 years old, after working for 45 years and giving everything I had to the people I loved, I was poor. Not just financially strapped. Poor. Unable to afford basic necessities poor. Choosing between food and medicine poor. One emergency away from homelessness poor. How had this happened? How had a woman who had worked every day of her adult life, who had saved every penny she could, who had invested in her family's future, ended up destitute in the richest country in the world? The answer was sitting in a 4-bedroom house in Westchester, swimming in a pool I had paid for, sleeping in comfort I had provided, living a life I had subsidized at the expense of my own survival. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in my 72 years on this planet. I went to a bar by myself and ordered a drink in the middle of the day. Murphy's Tavern on Amsterdam Avenue was dark and quiet, the kind of place where people went to disappear for a few hours. I sat at the bar nursing a glass of wine I couldn't afford and watching the news on the television mounted above the bottles of whiskey and gin. The bartender was a woman about my age with silver hair and knowing eyes. She didn't try to make conversation, but I could feel her watching me with the recognition that women our age develop for each other's pain. "Rough day," she finally asked as she wiped down glasses with a towel that had seen better decades. "Rough life," I replied, surprised by my own honesty. She nodded as if she understood completely. "Been there. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the worst." I looked at her more carefully then, seeing past the bar uniform to the woman underneath. Her hands were scarred and weathered, the hands of someone who had worked hard for everything she had. Her eyes held the particular sadness that comes from giving too much and receiving too little in return. "How do you get through it?" I asked. "One day at a time. One choice at a time." One moment at a time when you decide you matter too. One moment at a time when you decide you matter too. The words echoed in my head all the way home, repeating like a mantra I was afraid to believe in. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bank statements, adding up exactly how much money I had given to David and Sarah over the years. The number was staggering. $147,362, not counting the gifts, the meals, the babysitting, the emotional labor of always being available and never asking for anything in return. Nearly $150,000. If I had invested that money conservatively, it would be worth over $200,000 now. Enough for a comfortable retirement. Enough for dignity. Enough to live without fear of poverty in my old age. Instead, I had $1,234 in my checking account and a credit card that was maxed out from paying for Emma's birthday party expenses when Sarah had forgotten to withdraw money from the ATM. I looked around my tiny apartment with new eyes that night. The furniture I had brought from our house when Robert and I downsized, pieces that held memories of better times. The photographs on the wall, family pictures from when we were young and hopeful and believed in forever. The books I had collected over a lifetime of reading, stories of other people's adventures that I had lived vicariously while sacrificing my own dreams. All of it felt like evidence of a life I had given away piece by piece, moment by moment, choice by choice, until there was nothing left of me but the shell of a woman who existed to serve other people's needs. But that bartender's words kept echoing in my mind. One moment at a time when you decide you matter too. Maybe it wasn't too late for that moment to be now. The next morning, I called David's office and left a message asking him to meet me for lunch. Not a family meal where Sarah could control the conversation and Emma could provide distraction from difficult topics. Just the two of us, mother and son, having the conversation I should have initiated years ago. We met at a small diner in Midtown, the kind of place where coffee comes in thick white mugs and the noise level makes intimate conversation impossible unless you lean close and speak directly to each other. David looked older than his 37 years, stress lines creasing his forehead and gray threading through his dark hair. Success had been expensive for him too, I realized, though his sacrifices were different from mine. "Mom, you sounded upset on the phone. Is everything okay?" I looked at my son, this man I had raised with so much love and hope, and saw a stranger wearing his face. When had he stopped seeing me as a person with needs and feelings? When had I become just a resource he could tap when his own resources ran low? "David, I need to talk to you about money." His face immediately shifted into what I had come to recognize as his handling mom expression. Patient but impatient, loving but condescending, the look adults give children who are asking for something unreasonable. "What about money, Mom? I gave you and Sarah $147,000 over the past 10 years. The number hung between us like a challenge. David's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips, his eyes widening with what might have been surprise or guilt or simple mathematical shock. "Mom, that's not accurate. You helped us out a few times, sure, but that number is way too high." I pulled out the folder I had prepared, bank statements and canceled checks and credit card statements highlighted in yellow to show every transaction, every loan, every gift that had flowed from my account to his. $80,000 for your house down payment. $12,000 for Sarah's student loans. $6,000 for your car repairs. $3,000 for Emma's nursery furniture. $2,000 for your anniversary trip to Italy. $1,500 for Christmas gifts you couldn't afford. $800 for Sarah's sister's baby shower gift. The list goes on, David. It all adds up to $147,362. He stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. "But those were loans, Mom. We always said we'd pay you back." "When, David? When exactly were you planning to pay me back?" "It's been 10 years since the first loan. I haven't received a single repayment. We've been struggling too, you know. The mortgage, Emma's expenses, life in general. We were waiting until we got ahead. While I fall behind. While I can't afford my medication. While I choose between rent and food." The words came out harder than I intended, sharper than I usually allowed myself to be. David recoiled as if I had slapped him, his face flushing with what might have been shame or anger or simple discomfort at being confronted with the consequences of his choices. "Mom, I didn't know you were having financial problems. You never said anything. Would it have mattered if I had?" The question hung in the air between us, unanswered and maybe unanswerable. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the sounds of the diner rushing around us like water around stones in a stream. Finally, David reached across the table and put his hand on mine. For a moment, I thought we had reached each other, that this conversation would mark the beginning of a new understanding between us. "Look, Mom, I'm sorry if you feel like we've taken advantage of you. That was never our intention. Maybe we could work out some kind of payment plan, you know? A small amount each month until we get caught up. A small amount each month. As if nearly $150,000 was a tab at a restaurant that could be settled with the promise of $20 here and there when it was convenient. But it wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about being seen. It was about matching. It was about my son acknowledging that his comfort had come at the cost of his mother's security and that the debt was more than financial. It's not just about the money, David. Then what is it about? How do you explain to someone that they've erased you from your own life? How do you tell your child that their love feels like exploitation, that their presence in your world has become a source of pain instead of joy? It's about respect. It's about being valued for more than what I can provide. It's about feeling like I matter to my own family. David's expression shifted again, this time to the patient tolerance he probably used with difficult clients. Of course you matter, Mom. You're being dramatic. Dramatic. The word every woman over 50 has heard when she tries to express pain that makes other people uncomfortable. The accusation that dismisses a lifetime of swallowed grievances and ignored needs. I gathered my papers and put them back in the folder, my hands steadier than I expected them to be. David, I love you. I will always love you. But I can't keep funding a relationship where my value is measured by what I can give and my needs are dismissed as drama. I stood up from the table, leaving my half-eaten sandwich and full cup of coffee, leaving behind the illusion that this conversation would fix anything between us. Mom, wait. Don't leave like this. But I was already walking away, my back straight and my head high, feeling lighter with each step despite the weight of what I was leaving behind. That afternoon, I did something else I had never done in my adult life. I made an appointment with a lawyer. Mitchell & Associates was located in a modest office building in Queens, far from the prestigious Manhattan firms where David worked, but the attorney I met with, Elena Rodriguez, had the kind of direct honesty I needed. Mrs. Thompson, you're not the first senior citizen I've seen who has been financially exploited by family members. Unfortunately, you're also not the last. She reviewed my documentation with the same careful attention David had refused to give it, making notes in margins and asking questions that made it clear she understood both the legal and emotional complexity of my situation. The good news is that you have excellent records. The bad news is that without written agreements, recovering this money through legal action would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of success. I'm not sure I want to sue my son, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. I just want to understand my options. Your options are limited but not non-existent. You could pursue civil action for unjust enrichment. You could also take steps to protect what assets you have left. What kind of steps? Well, first, you need to stop the outflow. No more loans, no more gifts, no more financial support of any kind until your own security is established. Second, you need to explore every available resource for seniors in your situation. There are programs you may qualify for, benefits you might be entitled to. That word again, entitled. As if needing help was a privilege I had to earn rather than a basic human right in a civilized society. The most important thing you can do, Mrs. Thompson, is to start valuing your own needs as much as you've valued everyone else's. That's not legal advice, that's life advice. I left the lawyer's office with a folder full of resources and a heart full of something I hadn't felt in years, determination. Not hope exactly, but something harder and more practical. A resolve to stop enabling my own exploitation. The first test of that resolve came sooner than I expected. 3 days after my lunch with David, Sarah called with her usual brand of casual manipulation disguised as family concern. Margaret, I hope you're feeling better. David mentioned you were a little stressed about money. Don't worry about that silly number you showed him, families help each other, right? That's what love is. That's what love is. As if love was a transaction where one person gave everything and the other person took it with a smile. Anyway, Sarah continued without waiting for a response, I'm calling because we have a tiny favor to ask. Emma wants to have a princess party for her 8th birthday, and the venue we want costs a bit more than we budgeted for. Could you possibly? No. The word came out of my mouth before I could stop it, simple and clear and completely unlike anything I had ever said to my family before. I'm sorry, what? I said no, Sarah. I can't help with the party. A pause that stretched long enough for me to hear Sarah's breathing change, becoming shallow and sharp like a knife being sharpened. Margaret, it's for Emma. Your granddaughter. Are you really going to disappoint a little girl over money? The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost fell for it. The guilt that had controlled me for decades rose in my throat like bile, threatening to make me swallow my resolve and agree to one more request, one more small sacrifice that would prove I was still a good grandmother, still worthy of their conditional love. But then I remembered the bartender's words. One moment at a time when you decide you matter too. Emma can have a wonderful birthday without a princess party that costs more than my monthly rent. I'm sure you'll figure something out. I can't believe how selfish you're being. After everything we've done for you. I hung up the phone. I hung up on my daughter-in-law, something I had never imagined myself doing, and the silence that followed felt like the first breath of air after nearly drowning. My hands were shaking, but not with fear. With something that felt like power. Within an hour, David was calling. Then Robert, who had apparently been dragged into what Sarah was no doubt characterizing as my unreasonable behavior. Then David again, this time with Emma on speakerphone, her sweet voice asking why Grandma didn't want to help with her birthday party. I turned off my phone. For the first time in decades, I turned off my phone and sat in silence, completely unreachable to the people who had been reaching for my wallet while ignoring my heart. The silence was deafening and wonderful. That evening, I walked to the community center on West 84th Street, a place I had passed hundreds of times but never entered. Inside, an art therapy group was meeting, 8 women of various ages sitting around a table covered with paints and brushes and canvases that held the beginning of stories I wanted to learn. Can anyone join? I asked the instructor, a woman about my age with paint-stained fingers and eyes that crinkled with genuine warmth. Absolutely. I'm Linda. What's your name? Margaret. I used to paint, a long time ago. Well, Margaret, muscle memory is a beautiful thing. It all comes back. I took a seat at the table and picked up a brush for the first time in 30 years. The weight of it felt familiar, comfortable, like shaking hands with an old friend I had missed desperately without realizing it. What do you want to paint? Linda asked. I thought about that question as I squeezed colors onto a palette, blue like the dress I wore to David's graduation, yellow like the kitchen in our old house, red like the anger I was finally allowing myself to feel. Something new, I said finally. Something that's just for me. Over the next 2 hours, I painted something I couldn't name but recognized completely. Abstract shapes that flowed into each other like emotions, colors that clashed and complemented each other like the contradictions in my own heart. It wasn't pretty in any conventional sense, but it was mine. Completely and absolutely mine. When the session ended, Linda looked at my canvas with approval. This is powerful work, Margaret. Will you come back next week? Yes, I said, and meant it. I walked home through the Manhattan evening, my painting tucked under my arm like a secret, feeling more like myself than I had in years. The city lights reflected off the buildings around me, and for the first time in decades, they looked like possibility instead of judgment. That night, I slept better than I had since Robert's heart attack. I dreamed of colors and canvases and rooms full of light where I could create whatever I wanted without asking anyone else's permission or approval. The painting became the first of many. Each Tuesday evening, I returned to the community center and lost myself in the meditation of brush against canvas, the discovery of what my hands could create when they weren't busy serving everyone else's needs. The other women in the group became like salvation to me. Ruth, who was dealing with her own family dramas after her husband's retirement. Carmen, whose children had moved across the country and rarely called. Donna, who was rebuilding her identity after her husband's death. We were all learning the same lesson, that it was never too late to matter to ourselves, even when the people we loved had stopped mattering to us. But my family wasn't finished testing my resolve. 2 weeks after I started attending art therapy, Emma's birthday party came and went without my financial contribution. According to the photos posted on social media, it was a modest affair in their backyard rather than the elaborate venue Sarah had originally wanted. Emma looked happy in the pictures, surrounded by friends and family, blowing out candles on a homemade cake. She looked happy without the princess party that I had been guilted into funding. Imagine that. The passive-aggressive attacks started immediately after. Social media posts about grandparents who really love their grandchildren, complete with photos of other families where 3 generations smiled together in obvious harmony. Text messages from David asking if I was okay, because I seemed different lately. Concerned calls from Robert wondering if I was having some kind of breakdown. The suggestion that I was having a breakdown particularly stung, mainly because it was partially true. I was having a breakdown of the systems and patterns that had allowed me to be exploited for decades. I was breaking down walls I had built around my own needs, breaking down the programming that told me my worth was measured by my usefulness to others. It was the most productive breakdown of my life. But the real test came during Thanksgiving planning. For 30 years, I had hosted Thanksgiving dinner in whatever home Robert and I occupied at the time. I planned the menu, bought the groceries, cooked for days, cleaned the house from top to bottom, set the table with china I had inherited from my mother and polished silver I'd received as wedding gifts. The tradition had continued even after we moved into the tiny apartment, with me somehow managing to create a feast for 8 people in a kitchen the size of a closet, using a table I borrowed from the building's community room. This year, Sarah called in early October to discuss arrangements. We're so excited for Thanksgiving at your place again, Margaret. David's been craving your stuffing recipe all year. The assumption that I would host, that I would cook, that I would somehow absorb the cost and labor of feeding everyone while living on a fixed income in a space barely large enough for me. The assumption was breathtaking in its thoughtless entitlement. Actually, Sarah, I won't be hosting this year. Another pause, this one filled with the kind of silence that precedes storms. What do you mean you won't be hosting? I mean I'm not hosting Thanksgiving dinner. You're welcome to host it yourselves, or we could go to a restaurant, or everyone could handle their own plans this year. But it's tradition. Emma expects Grandma's Thanksgiving. You can't just change tradition. I can, and I am. Why are you being so selfish lately? First Emma's party, now this. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? The question I had been asking myself for years, but never in the way Sarah meant it. What's wrong with me that I accepted so little respect for so long? What's wrong with me that I valued other people's comfort more than my own survival? What's wrong with me that it took until I was 72 years old to realize I had worth beyond my utility? Nothing's wrong with me, Sarah. I'm just tired of doing everything while everyone else shows up and enjoys the benefits. That's not fair. We appreciate everything you do. Appreciation isn't enough anymore. I need actual support, or I need less responsibility. I hung up the phone again, and this time the silence felt familiar, like coming home to a place I'd been searching for my entire life. Within hours, the family mobilization began. David called to say I was disappointing Emma and breaking apart family traditions that meant everything to everyone. Robert emerged from his usual conflict avoidance to suggest I was being unreasonable and hurting people unnecessarily. But the most revealing call came from Sarah's mother, whom I barely knew but who apparently felt qualified to lecture me about my obligations as a grandmother. Margaret, Sarah tells me you're refusing to host Thanksgiving. I don't understand what statement you think you're making, but you're hurting innocent children. Innocent children. As if Emma would be traumatized by eating turkey at her parents' house instead of her grandmother's apartment. As if the location of the meal mattered more than the love shared around the table. I'm not making a statement, I told this virtual stranger who thought she could shame me into compliance. I'm making a choice based on my financial and physical limitations. Well, I think it's cruel. Sarah and David work so hard, and you're retired with nothing but time on your hands. Nothing but time on my hands. As if retirement was a vacation instead of a stage of life where resources become limited and energy becomes precious. As if not having a job meant I had no value, no needs, no right to decide how to spend my days. I hung up on her too. That night, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I called the community center and volunteered to help serve Thanksgiving dinner to seniors who had nowhere else to go. If I was going to spend the holiday helping people, it might as well be people who would appreciate it instead of expecting it. Thanksgiving Day dawned cold and bright, the kind of November morning that makes New York feel like a postcard. I dressed in my best sweater and comfortable shoes, grabbed the apple pies I had baked the night before, and walked to the community center with something I barely recognized as anticipation. The dining hall was decorated with paper turkeys and construction paper leaves, the kind of decorations that would have seemed childish in Sarah's perfectly appointed home but felt welcoming and warm in this context. Seniors from all over the Upper West Side filled round tables, some alone, some with friends, all grateful to have somewhere to go and someone to share the day with. I spent 4 hours serving food, refilling coffee cups, and listening to stories from people who understood what it meant to be overlooked by the world. There was Joe, whose daughter lived in California and called twice a year. Maria, whose son was too busy with his own family to include her in holiday plans. Frank, whose wife had died and whose children treated him like an obligation rather than a blessing. We were the invisible army of discarded seniors, the people whose contributions were forgotten once we stopped being useful, the generation that built the world our children inherited and then became irrelevant in the process. But in that community-centered dining hall, we mattered to each other. Our stories were heard, our presence was valued, our voices were important. It was the best Thanksgiving I had experienced in years. Meanwhile, according to the angry text messages I received throughout the day, David and Sarah's self-hosted Thanksgiving dinner was a disaster. The turkey was dry, the timing was off, Emma couldn't understand why Grandma wasn't there, and everyone was stressed and miserable. "This is all your fault," Sarah texted me at 9 o'clock that night. "You ruined everything by being selfish." I read the message while helping Linda and other volunteers clean up the community center kitchen, surrounded by people who had spent the day being grateful instead of entitled, appreciative instead of demanding. I deleted the text without responding. December brought the annual Christmas drama, with Sarah attempting to coordinate gift exchanges and dinner plans as if nothing had changed between us. When I explained that I would be spending Christmas with my community center friends instead of fighting for space in her perfectly decorated living room, the reaction was swift and brutal. "Fine," David said during what would be our last phone call of the year. "If you want to abandon your family for a bunch of strangers, that's your choice. But don't expect us to keep trying to include you when you obviously don't want to be part of this family anymore. Don't want to be part of this family. As if I had been the one creating distance, setting conditions, making love contingent on financial contributions and emotional labor. David, I will always want to be part of your life. But I want to be part of it as a person, not as a resource. I don't even know what that means. I know you don't. That's the problem. Christmas morning, I woke up in my tiny apartment and made myself a perfect breakfast of scrambled eggs and coffee that tasted like freedom. I opened the cards I had received from my art therapy group and the small gifts Ruth and Carmen had given me, a set of paintbrushes, a book about watercolor techniques, a scarf in colors that reminded them of my paintings. No one had asked me for money in 3 weeks. No one had called me with an emergency that required immediate financial assistance. No one had analyzed my bank account or calculated how much I could afford to contribute to their lifestyle. For the first time in decades, Christmas morning belonged to me. That afternoon, I video called Emma, who was surrounded by presents in the living room I had helped furnish with my retirement savings. Grandma. Look at all my presents. She was excited and happy and completely unburdened by the adult drama that had dominated the past few months. Children adapt, I realized. They adapt to new traditions and changed circumstances and different ways of showing love. They're beautiful, sweetheart. Are you having a good Christmas? Yes. Mommy and Daddy got me the art set I wanted. I'm going to paint pictures like you do. Like I do. Emma knew about my painting because I had told her during our brief conversations, but apparently no one else had paid attention to this new development in my life. I'd love to see your pictures, Emma. Maybe you could teach me sometime? Maybe I could. Maybe there would be a way to have a relationship with my granddaughter that wasn't filtered through her parents' resentment and manipulation. Maybe love could exist without financial transactions after all. After we said goodbye, I sat in my apartment watching snow fall over Manhattan and marveling at how quiet my phone had become. No requests for money. No guilt trips about family obligations. No emergencies that required immediate grandmother intervention. Just silence, and in that silence, the sound of my own thoughts for the first time in years. The new year brought unexpected developments. In January, Robert finally acknowledged what had been obvious for months. Our marriage had become a business partnership where I provided labor and financial support while he pursued emotional comfort elsewhere. Maggie, I think we need to talk about our situation. We were sitting in our tiny living room, me with a paintbrush in my hand and him with legal documents he'd obviously been carrying around for days. What situation is that, Robert? This distance between us. These changes you've been making. I don't know how to be married to someone who doesn't want to be part of the family anymore. The family. As if I had been the one pulling away, creating boundaries, making relationships conditional. I want to be part of a family, Robert. I just don't want to be the only one giving while everyone else takes. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. He set the papers on our coffee table, and I could see they were from a lawyer's office. I've been thinking maybe we should consider a trial separation. Give each other some space to figure out what we really want. What we really want. After 47 years of marriage, he was asking what we really wanted as if it was a question that had never occurred to either of us before. Is this about Sarah? I asked, though I already knew the answer. His face flushed red, the same color it had turned when he was caught in lies during our early marriage. This is about us, Maggie. About how we can't seem to connect anymore. We can't connect because you're connecting with someone else. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. And the worst part isn't even the emotional affair, Robert. The worst part is that you let her manipulate you into participating in my financial exploitation. You stood by while she isolated me from my own family and turned my love into a transaction. He stared at the floor, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. I never meant for things to get so complicated. Complicated? Is that what you call 47 years of marriage? The papers on the table represented a legal separation agreement, complete with asset division and support calculations. Robert had been planning this conversation for months, probably with Sarah's encouragement and possibly with her lawyer's help. I signed the papers that day, not because I wanted my marriage to end, but because I finally understood that it had ended years ago. I just hadn't been informed. The separation was surprisingly liberating. Robert moved into David and Sarah's guest house, the one they'd built with money I had lent them for home improvements. The irony was almost funny, if irony could be funny when it was destroying your life. Alone in the apartment I could now barely afford, I discovered something unexpected. I liked my own company. Without the constant stress of managing other people's emotions and needs, I slept better, ate better, thought more clearly. My paintings improved dramatically. Colors became bolder, compositions more confident, themes more personal and meaningful. Linda encouraged me to enter a local art show, something that would have terrified me 6 months earlier but now seemed like a natural step in becoming myself again. Your work has such emotional depth, she told me after a particularly productive session. It's like watching someone come alive on canvas. Coming alive on canvas. That's exactly what it felt like, discovering parts of myself that had been dormant for decades, creative energy that had been redirected toward other people's lives for so long that I'd forgotten it belonged to me. In March, I sold my first painting to a collector who saw my work at the community center show. $200 for something I had created with my own hands, my own vision, my own emotional truth. It wasn't enough to solve my financial problems, but it was enough to prove that I had value beyond what I could give to other people. I used the money to buy groceries without calculating whether I could afford both milk and bread. It was a small luxury, but it felt revolutionary. Spring brought more changes. Emma started pestering her parents to let her visit me, apparently interested in learning to paint. After weeks of negotiations that shouldn't have been necessary, Sarah finally agreed to let Emma spend a Saturday afternoon with me. We painted side by side at my small kitchen table, Emma chattering about school and friends while experimenting with colors that made her eyes light up. She had inherited artistic ability from somewhere in the family tree, her small hands sure and confident with the brush. "Grandma, why don't you live with us anymore?" The question I had been dreading, asked with the straightforward curiosity that only children possess. "Because sometimes people need to live in different places to be happy." "Are you happy now?" I looked around my tiny apartment with its secondhand furniture and borrowed table, at the paintings lining the walls like windows into my newly discovered soul, at my granddaughter covered in paint and glowing with creative excitement. "Yes, Emma. I'm happier than I've been in a long time." "Good. Mommy says you've been mean, but you don't seem mean to me." Mean. That's how Sarah had characterized my newfound boundaries to my own granddaughter. Not hurt, not protecting myself, not finally demanding respect after decades of exploitation. Mean. I'm not mean, sweetheart. I just learned that I need to take care of myself too. That's not mean. That's smart. Out of the mouths of babes. Emma's visits became more frequent as spring turned to summer. Sometimes David would drop her off with obvious reluctance, sometimes Robert would bring her during his scheduled visits with me. Each time, she painted with increasing skill and confidence, and I marveled at how much love could exist between generations without money changing hands or conditions being met. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Simple, genuine, based on affection rather than obligation or manipulation. But Sarah was building toward something, and I should have seen it coming. In July, she orchestrated what she probably thought would be the final confrontation, a family meeting designed to pressure me into resuming my role as the family ATM and emotional dumping ground. It was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon at their house in Westchester, with David, Robert, Emma, and Sarah's parents all in attendance. I almost didn't go, sensing a trap, but curiosity about what exactly they thought they could accomplish won out. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I'd last visited months earlier, every surface perfect and every decoration carefully chosen to impress visitors who might judge the family's success by their material possessions. The pool I had paid for sparkled in the July sunlight, and used because Sarah was worried about chlorine damaging her expensive patio furniture. Emma ran to hug me the moment I arrived, her arms tight around my waist and her voice excited as she told me about the pictures she'd been painting since our last visit. Behind her, the adults arranged themselves like a tribunal, their faces set in expressions of concern and disappointment. "Margaret, thank you for coming," Sarah began, her tone suggesting I was a wayward employee being called in for a performance review. "We wanted to have this conversation face to face because we're all worried about you." Worried about me? The concern trolling that people use when they want to manipulate someone back into compliance without acknowledging their own role in the situation. "What exactly are you worried about?" I asked, taking a seat on the couch I had helped them buy and facing the circle of people who had gathered to judge my newfound independence. "Well, this dramatic personality change, for one thing," Sarah's mother interjected, her voice dripping with the authority she clearly felt entitled to in other people's family business. "The way you've been treating people who love you. This refusal to participate in family activities," David added, his lawyer voice coming out as if he was presenting a case to a jury. "Your decision to spend holidays with strangers instead of your own family. The way you've been withholding support from Emma," Sarah said, playing what she obviously thought was her ace card. "Making a child suffer because you're angry at adults. Making a child suffer. As if Emma's life had been damaged in any meaningful way by not having expensive birthday parties funded by her grandmother's poverty." I looked around the circle of accusers, these people who had spent years taking from me while giving as little as possible in return, and felt something calm and powerful settle into my chest. "I haven't changed," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I've just stopped pretending that you haven't." "What is that supposed to mean?" Robert asked, speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. It means I've stopped pretending that giving you my retirement savings was investment in my family's future instead of subsidizing your lifestyle at the expense of my security. I've stopped pretending that being excluded from your lives except when you needed money was love instead of exploitation. I've stopped pretending that my needs matter less than your wants. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma, who had been coloring quietly in the corner, looked up with the wide eyes of a child who senses adult conflict but can't understand its source. "That's not fair," Sarah said finally, her voice tight with controlled anger. "We've never exploited you. We've been grateful for your help, and we've included you in everything. You've included me in everything you wanted me to pay for and excluded me from everything else." "That's not true." I opened my purse and pulled out the folder I had brought with me, the same documentation I had shown David months earlier but expanded now to include every text message, every ignored phone call, every family photo where I had been cropped out or positioned on the edge. $147,000 in 10 years. Thanksgiving dinners I cooked and cleaned up from alone. Birthday parties I funded but wasn't consulted about. Family vacations I paid for but wasn't invited on. Christmas celebrations where my gifts were the most expensive and my presence was the least important. I spread the papers across their glass coffee table like evidence in a trial, watching their faces as they confronted the mathematical reality of their treatment of me. "We didn't ask you to keep track," David said defensively. "I didn't keep track for you. I kept track for me. So I could understand why I felt so empty after giving so much. So I could figure out why love felt like bleeding." Sarah's mother leaned forward with the expression of someone who thought she was about to deliver a devastating blow. "Margaret, family members help each other out. That's what families do. If you're going to attach strings to every kindness, maybe you don't understand what family means." "If I don't understand what family means?" From a woman who hadn't spoken to me more than a dozen times in the decade since her daughter married my son, who was participating in this intervention without knowing anything about the dynamics she was attempting to judge. "Family members help each other," I agreed. "That's a two-way street. What has this family done to help me?" Another silence, this one longer and more uncomfortable than the first. We appreciate everything you've done," David said finally. "Appreciation doesn't pay for medication. Appreciation doesn't prevent poverty. Appreciation doesn't create the respect and consideration that should exist between people who love each other." I stood up from the couch, gathering my papers and my purse, preparing to leave behind the last illusion that this conversation would lead to understanding or change. "I'm not asking you to pay me back. I'm not asking you to apologize for taking advantage of my love. I'm not even asking you to acknowledge that you've treated me like a resource instead of a person." "Then what are you asking for?" Robert said, his voice weary and confused. "Nothing. I'm not asking for anything anymore. I'm telling you that from now on, I will make decisions based on what's best for me, not what's most convenient for you. I will spend my time and money on people and activities that bring me joy instead of people who make me feel invisible. I will participate in relationships where my presence is valued, not just my wallet." I walked toward the door, Emma's small voice stopping me halfway there. "Grandma, are you not going to visit me anymore?" I turned back to look at her, this beautiful child who had become a pawn in her parents' power games, and felt my heart break a little more. "I'll always want to visit you, sweetheart. But it has to be because we enjoy each other's company, not because I'm paying for the privilege." "I enjoy your company, Grandma. You don't have to pay me anything." Out of the mouths of babes, again. I kissed Emma goodbye and walked out of that house for what I knew would be the last time, feeling lighter with every step despite the weight of what I was leaving behind. The drive back to Manhattan took me through Central Park, where families were having picnics and children were playing on playgrounds and couples were walking hand in hand along paths dappled with summer sunlight. It was the kind of scene that would have made me cry 6 months earlier, a reminder of all the family connection I was missing. Instead, I rolled down my windows and let the warm air fill my car, feeling grateful for the first time in years to be alone with my own thoughts and free to make my own choices. That night, I painted until dawn, colors flowing onto canvas like emotions I had been holding back for decades. Reds for anger, blues for sadness, yellows for the hope that was finally beginning to bloom in the wasteland of my heart. By morning, I had created something fierce and beautiful and completely my own. The aftermath of the family meeting unfolded exactly as I had expected. Text messages full of hurt and accusation, phone calls I didn't answer, social media posts about grandparents who abandon their families and children who are left confused by selfish adults. I blocked them all. For the first time in my adult life, I prioritized my own peace over other people's comfort, and the relief was overwhelming. August brought unexpected news. Elena Rodriguez, the lawyer I had consulted months earlier, called to tell me about a class action settlement involving the hospital where I had worked as a nurse. Apparently, the pension benefits that had been reduced during the corporate merger were being restored partially through legal action I hadn't even known was happening. Mrs. Thompson, you're entitled to a settlement payment of $18,000, plus monthly pension restoration of about $400. It's not a fortune, but it should help with your financial situation. $18,000. Combined with the money I had stopped hemorrhaging to David and Sarah, it was enough to create a small cushion of security. Not wealth, but stability. Not luxury, but dignity. I used part of the money to move to a slightly larger apartment in the same building, one with enough space for a dedicated art studio and better light for painting. The rest went into a savings account that no one else had access to, a financial foundation I was determined to protect this time. September brought Emma back into my life in a way I hadn't expected. David, apparently overwhelmed by single parenting while Sarah pursued what she called personal development, which seemed to involve expensive workshops and mysterious overnight trips, asked if I would be willing to watch Emma after school 2 days a week. "I can pay you," he said during our phone conversation, his voice careful and formal as if we were negotiating a business transaction. "I don't want your money, David. But I would love to spend time with Emma if she wants to spend time with me." The arrangement started small and grew organically. Emma would come to my apartment after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, sometimes doing homework at my kitchen table, sometimes painting beside me in my new studio space. We would talk about her day, her friends, her dreams for the future, conversations that flowed naturally without the undercurrent of financial obligation that had poisoned so many of my family relationships. She told me about the tension at home, how her parents argued about money constantly now that my contributions had stopped. How Sarah blamed me for their financial stress while David worked longer hours to compensate for the income they had lost. "They're getting divorced," she told me one October afternoon as we painted autumn leaves in shades of gold and crimson. "Daddy says it's not your fault, but Mommy says it is. My fault." Even the end of their marriage, which had clearly been troubled long before I stopped funding it, was somehow my responsibility in Sarah's narrative. Divorce is never one person's fault, Emma. Sometimes people just can't find ways to make each other happy anymore. "Are you happy, Grandma?" It was the same question she had asked me months earlier, but now I could answer it with complete honesty. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm happy." And I was. For the first time in decades, I was genuinely happy. Not the desperate happiness of people trying to convince themselves their sacrifices were worth it, but the quiet happiness of someone who had found peace with their own choices. My art was improving rapidly, and I was selling pieces regularly at local shows and online galleries. The community center had asked me to teach a painting class for seniors, combining two of my greatest passions, art and helping people discover their own creative power. Ruth from my therapy group had become a close friend, someone I could call when I needed to talk, someone who understood the particular loneliness of being discarded by family members who no longer found you useful. We went to museums together, tried new restaurants, took weekend trips to places we had always wanted to see but never had the time or permission to visit. Robert had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting an equal split of assets we no longer had because I had given them all to his son and daughter-in-law. The irony was almost poetic. Emma's visits became the highlight of my weeks, 2 afternoons of pure joy with a child who loved me for myself instead of my bank account. She was becoming quite an artist, her paintings showing real talent and emotional depth unusual in someone so young. "I want to be a painter like you when I grow up," she told me one November day as we worked on a landscape inspired by the view from my apartment window. "You can be anything you want to be, Emma. But if you do become a painter, make sure you paint your own vision, not what other people want to see." "What's the difference?" "Your own vision comes from your heart. Other people's expectations come from their fear." She nodded solemnly, filing the advice away with the wisdom children collect when adults bother to share real truth instead of sanitized platitudes. As Christmas approached, I faced the first holiday season of my new life with something approaching excitement. Instead of the obligation and financial stress that had defined previous holidays, I had the freedom to choose how to spend my time and with whom to share it. Emma would be with me on Christmas Eve, a tradition we had established that belonged entirely to us without interference from her parents' complicated dynamics. We planned to bake cookies and watch old movies and paint cards for her friends, a celebration based on joy instead of expense accounts. Ruth had invited me to Christmas dinner at her daughter's house, the first time in years I would spend the holiday as a welcomed guest instead of an unpaid caterer. The prospect of eating a meal someone else had cooked, sitting at a table someone else had set, felt luxurious beyond description. On December 23rd, exactly 1 year after the last time I had spoken to Sarah, she called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won again. "Margaret, hi. I hope you're doing well." Her voice was different, softer, lacking the edge of entitlement that had characterized our previous conversations. I waited for her to continue, unwilling to make this easy for her. I wanted to call because I've been thinking about everything that happened. The divorce is final now, and I'm moving back to California to be closer to my family. Moving back to California. Taking Emma 3,000 miles away from me, from David, from the life we had all built together in New York. I'm sorry to hear about the divorce, I said, and meant it despite everything that had passed between us. I know things got complicated between us, and I wanted to apologize for my part in that. An apology. After all this time, an acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, she had contributed to the destruction of our family relationships. I appreciate that, Sarah. I also wanted you to know that Emma talks about you constantly. The painting classes you've been doing with her. It's been really good for her. You've been really good for her. For Emma. Not for the family, not as a general positive influence, but specifically good for my granddaughter in ways that mattered. She's been good for me too. A pause, filled with words neither of us seemed ready to say. Margaret, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would you be willing to stay in touch with Emma after we move? Maybe video calls, or visits during school breaks. She's going to miss you so much. She's going to miss me. Not, we're going to miss you, or, the family will miss you, but Emma specifically would feel the loss of our relationship. Of course I'll stay in touch with Emma. She's my granddaughter. Thank you. That means everything to her. And to me. We talked for a few more minutes about logistics and timing, the conversation civil and even warm in a way that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. When we hung up, I realized something had shifted between us, not toward friendship necessarily, but toward mutual respect for our shared love of Emma. Christmas Eve with Emma was everything I had hoped it would be. We baked sugar cookies shaped like paintbrushes and decorated them with icing in every color we could mix. We watched Miracle on 34th Street while drinking hot chocolate and painting ornaments for her new apartment in California. I don't want to move, Grandma, she said as we sat on my couch, her head resting against my shoulder while the credits rolled. I know, sweetheart. Change is hard, especially when you don't get to choose it. Will you call me every week? I'll call you every week for as long as you want me to. Forever? Forever. She fell asleep curled against me, and I sat in the glow of my Christmas tree lights thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. A year ago, I had been drowning in other people's expectations and demands, sacrificing my own needs to maintain relationships that were slowly killing me. Tonight, I was holding my granddaughter in an apartment I could afford, surrounded by paintings I had created, secure in friendships I had chosen, free from the financial and emotional exploitation that had defined my family relationships for so long. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And most importantly, it had been mine to make. Christmas morning, I woke up early and made coffee in my quiet kitchen, watching snow fall over Manhattan while I planned the day ahead. Ruth would pick me up at 2 for Christmas dinner, but the morning belonged to me. I had paintings to finish, a book to read, a phone call to make to my sister in Boston who had been worried about me during the difficult months of separation and divorce. For the first time in decades, Christmas morning felt like a gift instead of a performance I had to manage for other people's benefit. As I sat with my coffee and watched the city wake up around me, I thought about the bartender who had told me that transformation happens one moment at a time, one choice at a time, one decision to matter to yourself instead of existing solely for other people's comfort. She had been right. Change hadn't happened overnight or dramatically. It had happened gradually, choice by choice, boundary by boundary, until the woman who used to say yes to everything had learned the revolutionary power of saying no to the wrong things. I had learned that love without respect is exploitation, that family without boundaries is chaos, and that sacrifice without appreciation is a form of self-destruction. I had learned that it's never too late to save yourself, even from people you love, even from patterns that have defined your entire life. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't measured by what I could give others, but by what I could create, contribute, and become when I finally gave to myself. The phone rang as I was getting ready for Christmas dinner, Ruth calling to confirm pickup time and ask if I needed anything. I'm all set, I told her. Looking forward to a meal I didn't cook for once. Looking forward to having you, she said warmly. My daughter made extra dessert because I told her about your sweet tooth. Extra dessert for me specifically. Such a small gesture, but it represented something I had been missing for years, consideration. Being thought of, planned for, included not because I was needed but because I was wanted. These were the relationships I was building now, connections based on mutual care instead of one-sided giving, friendships that enriched rather than depleted my life. As I walked to Ruth's car that Christmas afternoon, wearing a new red dress I had bought myself and carrying wine I had chosen because I liked the label, I looked back at the building where I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. The apartment wasn't large, but it was mine. The furniture wasn't expensive, but it was comfortable. The paintings on the walls weren't famous, but they were honest expressions of a woman who had finally learned to value her own voice. It wasn't the life I had planned 40 years ago when I stood in St. Patrick's Cathedral promising to love and honor a man who would eventually honor other women more than me. It wasn't the family I had dreamed of when I held David as a baby and imagined a future filled with gratitude and closeness and mutual support. But it was a good life. A peaceful life. A life where I mattered to myself and to people who saw me as more than a source of financial or emotional support. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything I had been searching for without knowing I was searching. As we drove through Manhattan toward Ruth's daughter's house in Brooklyn, I watched families walking together on sidewalks dusted with snow, children bundled in colorful coats, parents carrying presents and pushing strollers, grandparents moving more slowly but with obvious purpose and belonging. A year ago, those families had looked like accusations, reminders of what I lacked, evidence of my failure to maintain the connections that defined other people's lives. Today, they look like celebration, proof that love comes in many forms and family can be created as well as inherited. I had Emma, who painted beside me every Tuesday and Thursday with increasing skill and obvious joy. I had Ruth and the other women from art therapy, relationships built on shared experience and mutual support. I had Linda and the community center, places where my contributions were appreciated and my presence was valued. I had myself, finally, after 7 decades of existing primarily for other people's benefit. The future stretched ahead like a blank canvas, full of possibility and free from the obligations that had weighed me down for so long. Emma would visit during school breaks, our relationship continuing across the distance because it was built on genuine love instead of financial dependency. David might eventually understand what had driven me away and work to rebuild trust between us. Robert would have to figure out his own path toward happiness without using me as a safety net or emotional crutch. But their choices no longer defined my well-being. Their approval no longer determined my worth. Their presence or absence no longer controlled my joy. At 73 years old, I had finally learned to live for myself, and the freedom was intoxicating. Ruth's daughter's house was warm and welcoming, filled with the sounds of cooking and laughter and genuine conversation. 3 generations gathered around the table, but not out of obligation or tradition or financial manipulation. They gathered because they enjoyed each other's company, because they had built relationships based on mutual respect and consideration. This was what family was supposed to feel like, and I was grateful to be included in it, honored to be chosen as part of someone else's celebration. As we said grace before dinner, I thought about the things I was truly grateful for, the courage to change patterns that were killing me slowly, the relationships I had chosen instead of inherited, the art that flowed from my hands like prayers made visible, the granddaughter who loved me for myself instead of my bank account. I was grateful for the moment I decided I mattered too, even though it had taken 72 years to reach it. Most of all, I was grateful for the discovery that it's never too late to save yourself, never too late to demand respect, never too late to choose joy over martyrdom and boundaries over exploitation. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to create. The canvas was blank, but my hands were steady and my vision was clear. For the first time in my life, that was enough. Have you ever lived through something similar, where love felt like exploitation and family felt like a burden you carried alone? Have you ever reached a breaking point where you had to choose between other people's comfort and your own survival? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the first step toward healing. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that your worth isn't measured by what you can give others, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me keep sharing these stories, because no one should have to suffer in silence, and everyone deserves to know that it's never too late to save yourself from even the people you love most. Remember, respect yourself enough to walk away from anything that doesn't serve your highest good. You matter too.